Hey everybody, my name is Ryan McDonald,
I'm Jason White.
and you're listening to the new Ogden Cinema Podcast, Episode 1.
Yeah,
So
you
we
made
are,
a.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, go for it.
Oh yeah, so at the moment, so I'm in Ogden, Utah, but Jason is in,
Seattle. We
who
we
knows?
yeah yeah. Who knows? Uh, we've taken the new Ogden Cinema and made it a concept and not a place anymore. So
Mhm.
now we're in Ogden, Utah. We're in Portland, Oregon. Seattle, Washington. We're all over the place.
No, for sure. You just came back from Slam Dance. Why don't you tell us about how that went?
Yeah. So which uh, you know, we've been doing this for so long, right? That Ryan and I've done, I don't know, like 25 films of different lengths, I think, something like that.
Mhm.
And so, in the last couple of years, instead of focusing on just production of short and feature length films, really started focusing on script writing again, and then not just that, but script writing competitions. And so I submitted to a bunch of festivals and competitions, and one of them being Slam Dance. And I actually got invited to the summer showcase down in downtown LA at Ogbo Studios, both last year and this year. And for those, Ogbo's where the Russo brothers, that's the studio they founded after, or probably during their Marvel tenure. So I was probably 50 feet away from conversations about the new Avengers films and had no idea. So it was rad experience though. Like you have to be invited to attend, and then it was almost like so secretive that it was ludicrous. Like about 48 hours out from the event, I got the location of the event and told that I was approved to go. And if you're in LA, which a lot of the homies down there were, not a big deal. But when you're this guy and up in Seattle, 48 hours notice is a little bit of a thing. But it was awesome. I got down there and they told me it was going to be first come, first serve. So there's no way I was going to fly 1,300 miles and not get in. So I've lined up extra early and that worked out and got to do some really cool things and learn some really cool things while I was out there.
No. So if you weren't, you're saying in line, like outside the building.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They had us check in and gave us like wristbands, and then like, but we still would like we're not allowed to go in. And then even then when we got to go in, it was very very selected places. Very 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 cool space and location. Um, but the Yeah, I mean, it was the networking event before before the event where we all milled around outside, avoiding the sun and hiding under the shade of trees and just shooting the breeze back and forth. But yeah, it was very much a Hollywood affair where the call time was noon, and we actually didn't get let in until like 12:05 or something like that, or 12:08. Like
Yeah.
yeah, but it was an all-day event. It was super rad. They had a lot of industry professionals teach us stuff, and I'd learned uh, quite a bit last year, and there was still plenty to learn this year. But it was interesting, like listening to some of my peers while I was there. Like, I mean, last year one of the speakers came back, and I thought his his presentation was completely different both years, so that was cool. Like he had new things to teach each year. But last year, I thought was the most honest assessment about like breaking into the film industry, and I appreciated it. And I was telling my peers about it because I was like, I think it's just best way to go is like be ready for your chance when you get it. Don't fuck it up when you do. And three is basically hit the lottery. Like that's how those are the three secrets to success in the film industry. Like, because everybody's got a completely different way of making it, but but when you get there, make sure you're prepared and willing to do everything you can. And I think if I was gonna, there's plenty of things, and we can on future iterations we can break down some of the stuff piece by piece. But one of the things I think is just interesting is some people had an issue with it. They're like, "Well, I was just really waiting for like that one piece of information." And I think like the reoccurring theme last year and this year that I took away was like, if you want to break into the movie business, it's just gonna be hard work, but don't give up because that's the key for a lot of things, right? In fact, I feel like I'm doing all the talking, but I'm good at it, so I apologize. But last year, when I was invited, I got told initially, like, hey, we filled up all of our seats. We don't have space for you. And I was like, oh, that's a bummer. But I did buy a round trip ticket, and I had. And they're like, well, that's a cool story, but you're not making it in because we're full. And I said, that's a real shame. And then wrote it off like I tried. I responded. I said, hey, I hadn't heard anything. Like, is there anything going on? And then I was about to cancel my ticket, and I got a response from somebody else at Slam Dance that said, which event did you want to go to? And I said, script writing one. And they replied back, you're in. We'll see you on Saturday. And I went, man, I turned to my wife and was like, I just got in, and now I got to go with no notice. I love you, but bye. Luckily, she loves me and supports me, uh, but like, I mean, in a lot of ways, like it felt like a breakthrough in its own right, right? Like I didn't stop advocating for myself and didn't take no for an answer, right? Like they're like,
Mhm.
nope. And I went, well, if things change, and they went still no, and then next thing you know, it's that, and then really like the recurring theme is like it's just persistence. And then one guy was like, the guy with the advice I was talking about this year, he's like, sometimes you have to step away from your product, your or project you're working on, and it may be years before you go back to it, but then you go back to it and you have a different perspective. And I was like, I'm glad to hear you say that because I feel that way. How do you feel about it? Like I've done a lot of talking, but like that
Well,
specific
it's because we're talking about how you went to slam dance. I mean, it's not
yeah,
that wrong
I
to
know,
talk about
I
that.
know. But I mean I feel that way and I keep
Yeah.
like encouraging you to revisit projects of the past. And so
Hmm.
how do you feel about that? Because I think it's solid advice, but how do you feel?
Yeah. Well, um, yeah, I think I feel that way too in different levels. Like, so I'm currently editing a film that my wife Brandy directed, and there's moments where it was funny on the page, but now as I'm editing it, it's like, is it funny? But then I remember having that same feeling when I was editing my last short film, Frankencock, where I was editing it and I was like, is this really even funny? Because I think this is just dumb. But then I went to bed about it and I woke up the next day and I looked at it again and I was laughing. Or then I saw her laughing about it when I was showing her and I was like, okay, it is funny. Um, and um, years ago, I wrote a screenplay, The One You Feed, and there was some feedback from, we did like a roundtable reading at one of our New Ogden Cinema meetings, and there was a lot of different approaches to it. And there was a character that Jake Hart had said he doesn't think that person should actually die. Maybe that person should live. And I was in disagreement with him because at the time I just thought like this one character should die. But then on my last trip to Hollywood with my wife Brandy, we were having dinner at the Hollywood Roosevelt, and I suddenly dawned on me. I was like, what if he was right? What if that character should live? And that actually like leaves the idea was that like my character has a choice of two different paths that he should go on. And it was like if this girl dies, then he certainly is going to go on the revenge path. And then, but the idea I started thinking about was like, what if she gets injured but she doesn't die? but he still goes on the revenge path anyways. That leaves the character the choice of doing it instead of like kind of a forced kind of choice or whatever. And we can kind of disagree, like the audience, I mean, says, but I wouldn't have come to that probably. It's been like 9 years since we did that reading. Um, and so there's a lot that I sometimes it's like it took me 9 years to come to other changes that I've also thought about making in it that aren't drastic, but just like nuances of things. Um, but then some of the newer stuff that I've been doing lately, like even the thing I'm editing, like it's the competition is the deadline's coming up quick. Everything's so fluid that it's still organic in the way that even we're editing it and we're coming up on the fly with different voiceovers we should use here and there. And so we're kind of forced to make these changes now instead of waiting 9 years to make those changes.
Sure.
Um, and so on one hand, then I feel like my previous screenplay, the one you feed, I kind of like was assuming that it was like it had to be perfect before it could make that launch. When perhaps had we had made that jump way back then, maybe I would have come to those conclusions at the time as we were making it, and or maybe I needed to practice these 9 years where we could shoot it tomorrow, and as we're shooting it, I could make that organic. Like, wait, this doesn't need to change this way. Let's do. I see how this is piecing together differently or something. So I agree, but to answer that, then I think there is something to stepping away from something for a moment. I don't think somebody should step away for 9 years from a screenplay like I did, but I think that, I do see like cool, you wrote it, now put it to bed, now come back to it almost like a fresh and new in a new person to it, you know,
Well,
and you see it from a different light.
there's that, and but I do think like to a certain extent too, like there is a amount of like it's not uncommon. Like we hear about like I mean, there are all the success stories, right? But like, Clint Eastwood said getting the screenplay for Unforgiven, then putting it at a desk for 10 years until he was old enough to play the role, right? Or
Hmm.
like just how many passion like okay, the man who killed Don Quixote, right? For Terry Gilliam, like that dude tried to make that movie for like 20 years, if not more, like 30, right? So there's probably like it's not outlandish to think that you can have a script that you're going to be sitting on and it's going to see many iterations that may not be produced for decades, and that's okay, I think, as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
the act of the just like it's interesting to not from the I want to use a phrase that I think is, but it's like the children from the adults, right? To a certain extent, right? The boys from the
Hmm.
men. Like,
Yeah.
there's the people who talk about doing things, and then we'll do like short film, right? And then never make a transition, and that's perfectly fun. They're like however many like we've made so many short films and learned by doing it, and hell, like still making them, might I add, because you
Yeah.
just talked about being on a production for them.
Hmm.
But we've also made feature film, and to after a certain point, for me, I'll let you speak for yourself, but for me, after a certain point, it's like, okay, the commercial viability is really in the feature films, right? And let's be honest, that's where my passion is as well. Like I want to do long form storytelling. I don't necessarily just have vignettes to tell to get out feelings or whatever like childhood trauma I want to put on the page. But like there is there is a desire to do that, and it's interesting when you meet. I've met a lot of people both in journeys like locally here in Utah, and even at Slam Dance, where it feels like there's a lot of people that are so focused on making short films, which there's no wrong answer. Uh, the guy who did Whiplash, like I can't
Hmm.
remember his last name. That
Yeah.
was a short film
Damon
before it's a feature.
Chevelle.
Yeah. I want to say the guy who did Evil Dead, the original remake, like I remember you and I joked, was like, that guy got it off of a short film. Like, what are
Hmm.
we doing here? And now he's like directing what looks to be an incredible uh,
Alien
film in the Alien
Romulus.
series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so there's no right or wrong way, but it feels like as long as you have the physical thing, right? You have the feature
Hmm.
length script. Like, yes, you keep working on it, refining it for its moment is kind of how I'm starting to feel now. Not that I want to sit on anything for a decade, but let's be honest,
Hmm.
like I've now written three feature length screenplays, and two-thirds of them I needed time to work. Like I needed, unfortunately, like at the time, years to work out. But then both, so the newest one I actually submitted to this year's screenplay competition at Slam Dance Edgewater, and it's more of like a musical in the vein of Crazy Heart, where it's actual musicians.
Hmm.
But it took me, I had that thing sitting at like 50 some odd pages forever. And then the screenplay competition was coming up, and I'm like, I really want something else. I need it for my own momentum. And I
Hmm.
think that the screenplay competition, like having played around in that space for the last couple of years, I think that's a lot of good and free expo. Well, pay to submit, but a lot of free exposure, networking opportunities right before you even
Hmm.
get to production. Um, but the ability to have that like deadline coming up on me, I got my procrastination out and was able to like just start blowing through pages where I had been blocked, and then that mental block of like life experiences crept in where all of a sudden like the ending completely resolved itself for me, and I was able to get, and I hope not just garbage, but I was able to get like over 20 pages of what I feel to be quality enough because I've submitted it out, but it was just blocked until I was ready to find it. So
Hmm.
it's just one of those things. Like when he said that, I was like, yeah, I've been living it, unfortunately, but I feel good to hear that this industry professional also lives in that space, and so I'm not alone.
Yeah. No, that's no. I mean, there's a lot to be kind of unpacked. Is there everybody's writing style and different things? How there's like different also idea spaces, whether you're driving a car or you're sitting or you're like taking a shower, things like that, where suddenly that light bulb like pops on a fresh idea and reinvigorates something that was at one point dormant, I guess, or even kind of in a writer's block, kind of a moment, um, and pushes it through. And I think there's a lot of people like who forget. I'm waiting for somebody to make this a documentary or book about this, where it'd be like where you go to people who are in those industry professional moments, and the focus would be simply about the time before their big break. Because I think that there's some times where there are one-off stories where somebody was like walking down the street and suddenly got picked up by like a casting director and was like, "Oh my gosh, like you would be this great," and they were like, "Oh, I was just delivering pizzas." And there's those random stories, but I think that a lot of people forget, like even with Tarantino, aside from the fact that he's immensely talented, but like I've heard from people who's been like, well, you don't need to go to college to be Quentin Tarantino, and yada yada. It's like, yeah, but if you read the guy's like cinema speculation book, if you look back, like he wasn't just working at the video store, he was like interviewing these people, like he was going to like Paul Schrader's house. Now he lived in LA, so he could go do that, and he was enthusiastic about movies on a certain level that allowed him to bypass sometimes the gatekeepers, right, to get those interviews. And this is long before Reservoir Dogs. This is even before he started making the feature film that he lost in the fire at the film Celluloid plant before he made Reservoir Dogs. And I think that also he did a Sundance workshop the summer before he shot Reservoir Dogs.
Mhm.
And so it's not like the guy didn't just fall out of the sky and suddenly he just went from working at the video store to being a movie filmmaker, right? Everything like there's a journey of a story there of a person who was like constantly working at this in some degree before that big break moment. But um, but that's just my thought, or maybe that's the solace I find myself in when I go like, oh, the big break's down the road. If so long as we keep pushing and we keep writing, we keep publishing something or whatever, right?
I mean,
Like
it's
that, then
the work.
then suddenly when that lottery ticket, like you're only going to win if you keep on playing, right?
Hmm.
Kind of thing. So
I mean, at the end of the day, I look at it like it's definitely like you've got to put the work in. Like, and it, it, it was interesting because one they had another speaker that had been there before, and the whole point of them was like how to write a screenplay that gets recognized. And I'll be honest, like it's by Beverly Neufeld, and I think she graduated from UCLA, and but is currently a teacher at USC, and does like has done script reading for both Slam Dance and other organizations and competitions and whatnot. But like she like takes and breaks down the entire process of what it's like to be a screenplay reader. And yes, she's not connecting us with people. What she's doing though is showing you the boxes you have to check in order to score high enough to be recognized. And in a lot of ways, like what what I heard from some of my peers was like, oh, well then how am I supposed to how am I supposed to get noticed if what it's like no. What you're seeing there is like if you want to get noticed, it's gonna be a lot of hard work.
yeah,
And then, even after you've done all the work of like crafting the screenplay, it's even more work. Like that is like the beginning of the journey for a person. And there's a lot of different ways you can go. In fact, like talking to different people and networking at these events, like there's like, oh, sell it to this like you could sell it to this indie farmer. They'll basically give you a couple thousand for your script, and then like cast some like C-level actor, and then film it, and then put it like film it in Romania, and then put it out for a straight to video or whatnot. And it was like that's interesting. And don't get me wrong, I would still be grateful to get my name credited on a movie. I do kind of feel like my idea has enough merit where if I'm gonna get like I would like to not just like at the cost of like even $5,000, like that's a chunk of change, but thinking about all the time that I've put into like
mm,
researching, which doesn't seem like a thing, right? But like I I think this is another area that you and I like we kind of agree on, but like for us when we're making film, like we've like watched so many movies that it's not just a matter of like, oh, I want to make movies. It's like I want to make movies like that, and there's a
hmm
grammatical. I hear Brian De Palma talk about it a lot of, where it's like the grammar of filmmaking, right?
hmm
And I see shots by different filmmakers, Brian De Palma being like one of the biggest ones for me. And I know he's ripping off Hitchcock, but that's what's beautiful is it's still his own unique flavor enough to where like I'm interested to watch it. But my love for that then comes into my films, right? And I'll take a shot that's very reminiscent of that, much like he would take a shot from like Psycho or Rear Window or whatever, and it's
hmm
doing the same thing. And I feel like, have I had the success? No, but I hope that when you watch one of our films, you feel that like love or see that love of cinema and that cinematic grammar that has inspired us and then hopefully translates onto screen.
hmm
Because when I watch a lot of other films, like I went to the actual Slam Dance Festival in Park City this year, the last one, unfortunately, in Park City. And there were a lot of films that were really well, they're shot really, really sexy, but they don't have a soul to them, right?
hmm Like a
And
cinematic soul.
mhm,
Like yeah.
yeah, good story, killer cinematography, but the shot choices feel flat, or the characters feel a little bit flat or uneven.
Hmm.
And there was a part of this year's script writing, like after the script writing piece, there was a part where we got to go see the best of the best short films. And there's a lot of times where you see indie movies, and I mean, if you're an indie filmmaker to a certain extent, you're somewhat of a snob. Like that's why we're indie filmmakers, right? But you go, man, I could do that better. And I won't lie, like I'd say most of those movies, I was just like blown away by like seriously visual poetry. And I was like, I've never thought to do something like that, but it invoked such a response. Or God, I wish I could find. There was one that was like there's some animated ones, and those blow my mind with how people are engaged. But like we talk about some of the movies you watched in college. This thing was like all about this guy's like cock. It was an animated film all about his cock, and then it was just like I don't even know how to describe it. It was like taking drugs and then watching a dude like just be so pent up for like I don't know a year and a half, and then like go, what do you think about your penis? And he went, I'm gonna make a movie about it, and that's and that's what happened. I mean, and it was entertaining. It was wild and fucking out there. But there's a moment where this dude is like, and it's animated. There's a moment where this dude's sucking his own cock, and you're just like, I mean, wouldn't be my first choice of a film. Um, but at the same time, like I was entertained, and I think about that movie. I think about that movie. Here we are a month later, and I still am like, man, that was just a cinematic adventure. And when I find the name of that thing, I'll share it so that people must see this movie. Cinema.
Well, you were talking about the shot composition, and kind of like how hollow they are compared to, um, I guess, invoking some type of language. And you and I go back and forth on not back and forth as far as the debate. You and I are in agreement on what I'm about to say. I believe, but like where it's like, yeah, your shots are beautiful, but you forgot the edge the indie film can have. Um, and it's not to say that every indie film has to be an animated movie where a guy's sucking his own cock. But the idea that like, but it's indie. Like like why be conventional? When you're already in the indie game, kind of a thing. Or why, we've talked about movies that were Hollywood hits, not Hollywood hits, but like Hollywood safe movies that win best picture and whatnot. And yeah, they're the safest movies they are. Um, Coming back to Tarantino, maybe that's why I picked Pulp Fiction was such a rad film when it came out because it was indie and it also had some moments that people just we hadn't quite seen. And it sounds as though it's like ultra violent, and yet there's like maybe people that die in the whole movie, if that.
Yeah.
Um, like Commando has like a kill count like 10 times higher. And yeah, Pulp Fiction was like the violent movie of its time kind of thing. But I think it's because of the rawness of certain moments. Maybe it's like the dialogue of like sticking your tongue in the holiest of holies, or like watching like um neo Nazis like fuck a black guy from behind, like sodomize a black guy. Um, in a sense. And so uh Matt Johnson and I were chatting about this the other day. Um, the so last year I made a short film called Ancient Evil Frankencock, where is like the character he's um what do you call it? He's castrated brutally, and then he sews his penis back together, and it comes back as a monster that's bigger than than him almost, and it's his own cock. And the year before, I made a film that was a werewolf, a short film that was a werewolf who he only comes out at night when like a woman is on her period. And um, and I what I was telling Matt Johnson was like the film festival that I made them for. When I made the Wolfman one, I was thinking for sure I was like we're gonna win. Like this is good. We're gonna win. And my focus was almost like win that particular competition. And what happened was is we won best special effects, and that was the only thing we won. And we lost in so many different ways. And I was really frustrated by that. So by the next year, when I got asked by the same festival director to come back and like, hey, will you do another film? In my frustration, I was kind of like, I don't want to because I felt like I had a slam dunk the year before and I lost. So now I was like, well, and it was going to be in 3D. And I thought, well, if it's going to be in 3D, then I might as well do the Frankencock idea I've had for the longest time. And we'll just do this in 3D half the time. And fuck you guys. Like everybody in the audience. Um, and if they don't, and I wasn't even sure. So the newest competitions, by the way, are now are not the horror films. The one that we're about to be in, it does specifically say we have to be in PG-13. Um,
For those not in the know, that possibly is because of us. Because the
yeah.
first festival we went to that we made a movie, we got called out specifically. They're like, some thought making a dark Christmas movie was about a Santa that's jogging and potentially making sure that you meet your weight goals. And for others, it's some dark rape Santa fantasy. And I went, no, that's
That's
us.
us. Yeah.
Also, it's inspired by Brian De Palma, by the way.
But it
So,
was yeah, but we know what we're trying to yeah, that's things like we know that we're doing like Brian De Palma stuff. And Brian De Palma stuff is like in some way highly sexualized. And I would make the argument that that though he's following Hitchcock, he's basically doing Hitchcock outside the Hays Code era because Hitchcock one was very highly sexualized. He just had the Hays Code around him that stopped him from being able to do the things that he wanted. But and so we do the at the last minute I decided I'm going to sign up for the film, but also in kind of like fuck this, fuck like you didn't like what I did before, fine. Now we're going to go full cock. Um, and the an actress who was in the film, she was also in the film of another team that was in competition, and a couple of the members of the other team I've known since high school, or we've known each other since high school. One of them, he said that the actress had let them know of the script and that they heard the concept in a sense, and because based upon the dark Christmas films where we've done where there's been girls who are masturbating before Santa Claus comes and kills them, where like I guess what's the sexualization with the talking dog? I don't know. Um,
oh,
but
well, in that one, like I do like where it's very much Dario Argento, who's the Italian
yeah,
version of Brian De Palma, where there's a guy that comes in and
with the glove,
literally
yeah.
chokes the wife with a glove. Yeah.
And that's Jason's film, Ancient Evil 29. Uh, and so we So anyway, so the comment from one of the people from the team was is that like, yeah, your guys' stuff is like really rapey, and we've always wondered like, is everything okay? And I laugh because in my heart though, I know that they watch just basic bullshit contemporary cinema. Um, and what I mean by that is like nothing this challenging, nothing this like um too far from the beaten path of what they typically watch. And they probably, as much as they call themselves filmmakers, probably don't watch it in the same way that you and I do, where we actually see like where we sometimes can see shot for shot and um different effects along the way. And I understand also at the same time as I say all these things is that I sometimes can come off as what you said snobbish or pretentious. You weren't speaking to just me, but like but at the same time it's like if we're not if you know if you're on a film set we're not really talking about like what shot like who's inspiring this next piece, then you know there's been times where I'm sitting there going like, oh yeah, just sit in the cane low. And I mean like get down to the fucking ground and look straight up at the person as low as you can and whatnot. And sometimes there'll be like Citizen Kane, like what's that? And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like um But anyways, so we did the movie Full Cock, and we swept the awards. We won the audience award. We won the best. I won best director. We won best film. We won best special effects, um, and and best scare as well. And I go like, so what I was explaining to Matt was like, it was just like we've been saying the whole time, is like we should do them for us. And if we're the ones who are laughing in the audience, then we know that we're good. And for everybody else, fuck them. Um, and I can say that the same short film just played over the weekend in Long Beach at a HorrorCon festival in Long Beach. It played yesterday, yeah, in the what the fuck category. And I got an
Nice.
email about 2 hours before we started this that we won the audience award for the what the fuck category. So I'm good with
Congratulations.
that. I like
All it
that.
took was a 3 foot tall talking dick puppet,
Yeah.
and but
Now, it's not to say
okay.
that every indie film needs to have an animated or a puppet cock, but the point I was making was that like if you that they shouldn't also feel like you're trying to mimic Hollywood all the way to a degree. Um, and if I think if you look at the indie films that we aspire to, like Clerks, Pulp Fiction, um, probably even Slacker, like those are those are films that weren't trying to be Hollywood; they were just trying to be films.
Yeah.
Um, and Brian De Palma, I mean, even his most Hollywood film, probably Mission Impossible, still feels very Brian De Palma-ish. That and maybe Untouchables. Um, but then he has his slew of things that are just him, like Carlito's Way and
There's always like
Raising
even
Cain and Body Double. And
he just
uh,
but even his like Untouchables and Mission Impossible, like he takes his voyeuristic tendencies and incorporates them into those. Like it just makes it part of the story. But like his love for first person perspective, like he sneaks it into Untouchables, and it's this moment of real good tension where like somebody's trying to sneak up on
Sean
Sean
Connery.
Connery.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's very like you see it that like if you've seen any of his films, you know the shot I'm talking about, but it's very much like ethereal and like first person and
Hmm.
following through and yet building tension, and you're just in the passenger seat in those moments. And Mission Impossible, like point of view, is like a huge point of it. In fact, it's like the revealing. It's like what reveals the like John Voight character, right? Is like
Hmm.
first person. He's like Google Glass before they have it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's POV, and yeah, I mean, I think that. But it's that love that makes those movies worth watching, and I think like there's also like you said, making a movie that you want to see in that movie that you intended to make, right? Like I think one of the things, like with my most recent script, not even made, but I have this tendency to where I want to do, I kind of half hate it when I see it in a movie, and yet I don't know why I'm emulating it. I'm gonna call it like the indie ending, right? Where it's like it's kind of like half unsatisfying, right? Just leave you there to question, and to me, it's the pretentious part of me. It's like, well, I leave it open to interpretation for you to see how you feel, and then you get to pick your own ending. And you know, yes, I like the concept of that, but I mean, it's okay to have a satisfying ending too. And in my most recent script, like I always wanted it to be like, so it's about rock stars, right? Like in the vein of like, God, how many countless bands where they had it all, and then like inner turmoil blew the band up. Yeah, I mean, you
Hmm.
could just there's countless real life examples, but a lot of what I've taken away from that is not just like those examples is very much like family and human struggles, like things that I tend to enjoy quite a bit. Like, can you break it down, like two brothers in a band? Really, it's that struggle of being in a relationship with your brother and the opposition and whatnot. And that's kind of the approach I took with it. And in the end, I always wanted it to be like, well, he knows his brother's gonna fuck him over because that's what like he always does. And then it would be this moment like they had it all, they pissed it all away, and now they're getting back together for the reunion so he can be part of his band. He's kind of found his passion for music again, in that part of his life, right? And on the side of the stage, him and his brother have yet another blow up because of course they're going to. It's
Hmm.
the frog and the scorpion, right? You know the scorpion's going to stab you.
Hmm.
Why did you swim across? So they have that blowout, and then I always wanted it to be like in my mind. I was like, and then I'm gonna do the indie fucking ending where he's gonna be on the side, and the band's gonna be rocking, and then he's gonna be like, it's just gone through this moment. He's like, Willie, won't he? And then it cuts black, and I'm like, you know what? Like I kind of I've done that in other scripts. I've seen it a million times, and at the same time, like it's a fucking cop out. That's how I felt this time around that I was writing. I was like, that's a goddamn cop out. Like you could do better. And
Hmm.
so I was like, just write a cool what would a '90s action hero or '80s action hero say? And it'd be like, no motherfucker, this is my band and I'm gonna take it back. Or something like I'm gonna see you on the way out. It's cooler than that, I promise you. Read the script, yeah, you'll love it. No, but like in a sense, I gave it an ending where it wasn't just more this like poor me or will he won't he, like he's just self-destructive and is he gonna be self-destructive again? It's like no, he's like actually had a change. So
Hmm.
instead of sliding back into going and working dive fucking bars, playing shitty ass tunes by himself, like no, he's gonna go be part of that band. And he's gonna fight for that band, even if it means kicking his brother out for this next iteration. That's his fucking band,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of that indie ending and just like the stuff that at our level,
Yeah.
just call it. And so there's a lot of that. It's unsatisfying, and I feel like that's where it's the trap of being mysterious. But anyway, I've said plenty
We've
about it.
Yeah. Well, you've said before we'll read other people's scripts, and there's kind of like there's a special balance between being confusing and being mysterious.
Yeah,
All right. And so, as much as as much as a person's trying to be mysterious, if they keep too much to themselves, then it becomes confusing, and then it's almost frustrating at that point. And then they're trying to like, I'm going backwards on when it's what I was saying. It's like now they're trying to be indie, and instead of just being indie because you have no choice but to be indie, like you're trying to be indie.
yeah,
Whereas like in some cases, like I don't have a choice. Like I don't have the budget for what we're looking at, so like I'm left with giving you what I got
yeah.
compared to like how do I dial this down of a couple $1 million without making it look like that. So
If for all you handful of like out of the dozens and dozens and
yeah.
handfuls of fans, if you want to take away anything, it's a concept that we've talked about forever. But like a lot of people at an indie level get complex and confusing mixed up. And so you'll read a
Yeah.
script or you'll see a movie and the whole time it's like, ooh, it's this thing. Oh, it's this thing. And then you get to the end and it's nope, it's this thing that we've never seen before. And now it's over here and you're like, why is that? And it's like, well, I just didn't want the audience to know from the beginning, so I just it's like you withheld the information then to a certain extent, you're feeding your own ego by saying like, "Oh, you weren't as smart as me because you couldn't figure it out." It's like, no, you made it confusing, so nobody followed along, and now it's not mind blowing. It's drivel. It's
Yeah.
trash. So
Yeah.
make it complex, not overly so. because then it will be confusing. But make it complex and not confusing if
Yeah.
you're gonna attempt that. Like Christopher Nolan's a great example. His movies are complex as hell, but when you break them down, not really all that confusing. I mean,
Yeah.
from a like, there's concepts for sure, but like
Mm.
they're very much rewatchable, and you learn more about the film and whatnot.
Yeah. Thematically, they're um not simple. That's a bad word, but like Inception. At the end of the day, it's a film about a man with regret, um, but told in a completely different way. But on the simplistic level, thematically, that's what it is. DiCaprio's character learning to deal through regret of accidentally incepting his wife, and we're to a point where she killed herself, and that's where you get to the end. And we could dissect Tenet and all this other stuff, but like there's that's what kind of like helps thread those movies along to a point where they're not so completely confusing.
Well,
Um,
take it back to when he was more on our level, like much
Following.
much more the master. Like, so don't let
Yeah.
nobody crucify me for saying, but when he was much more, like smaller, like Memento is a great example.
Yeah.
That movie is like it feels confusing the first time you watch it, but it's
Hmm.
just complex. And by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, I fucking get it. And then you rewatch that movie and you're keyed in like it's much like it's still rewatchable, but it's very much like the movie makes sense as you watch it. You get to the end and it all comes together. Your mind hasn't put together the
Hmm.
puzzle. And honestly, that's a blessing that we don't get very much anymore, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But I think that's like it's not as insane level of his more recent endeavors with like Inception and Tenet, but very much like he from the beginning, he's always showing us something that's complex but still digestible.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, um, so because I'm not in a transitional material. Uh,
As Carlo said, see, I
uh,
don't do transitional material.
I was Father of the Year this weekend and fulfilled both a lifelong dream for myself and an unrealized lifelong dream of my children that they figured out at a much earlier age. So I took my three children to go see RoboCop on the big screen this weekend as it was
Nice.
playing. It was playing at a. It's an older. It's a rad joint. It's kind of that movie grill style, brewery style, where like you have assigned seating. They come around with food, but unlike most of the places I've been to, they actually make the theater pitch black dark.
Okay.
So when you go in there and you're watching the movie, it was cool. And then I was kind of a little worried it was going to be like a smaller screen, and it wasn't. Like it was like legit huge screen. So it was like
Mm.
older style seating, but it was funny. Like you each have it. It's like two chairs are together, and you each get a like little table in front of you. But we totally went and watched RoboCop,
Nice.
and that is a movie that I have seen probably hands down the most out of any movie I've ever seen. Is like it's the one I watched the most. And by the way, just for the record, I've been watching that movie since I was 3, which I'm not advocating for, by the way. But when I say it's my favorite movie, like I love that movie. And so I waited till my kids were more age appropriate ages. I'm not gonna say how old, but they were not 3, but they were not 13. And funny story, by the way, it said it was rated R, but it was totally the NC-17 cut.
Oh.
Uh, where Ed 209 turns the Mr. Kenny into hamburger, and also they blow off like Alex Murphy's entire arm, not just his hand. Um, so so yeah, a little bit of a fail on the R rating, but you know what? I'm gonna forgive you because I was taking my kids to RoboCop, and I got to see it on the big screen. I got to show them on the big screen, and
Hmm.
they've seen the movie before, by the way. So before you're like, you
Yeah.
fucking, for anybody out there's like, you monster, I prepped them. And by the way, like
Hmm.
when they felt uncomfortable, uh, you know, we've talked about the movie. There's certain parts where I did cover my son's eyes because he's my youngest, uh, and they've seen it before, so they were kind of cued in on the beats. But I know that movie so well that like I just kind of like know where it's going to be a little too
Hmm.
intense, and it's the parts where like yeah, the Ed 209 turning Mr. Kenny into Hamburger, and Alex Murphy getting Hero blown away and then still standing, and then the other part that's really like upsetting is the part where the dude gets into the toxic waste and he comes out and he's like half hunchback in Notre Dame, like where he's like howling and stuff. Those parts are, uh, but yeah, that movie's ultraviolet, so there's no justifying. But it was incredible to see on a screen that was like,
Yeah.
like
Were you the only one who had kids there?
oh, of course I was. In fact, a lot of the people there were not to. I mean, okay, just stereotypes for a reason, Ryan.
Hmm.
If you were going to picture who was going to be in that theater to see RoboCop, who would you picture? I'm just curious.
Well, I don't know, adults. Like,
All right, well,
uh,
I have a more vivid imagination. If not,
okay.
I'll paint the picture if you want.
Yeah.
But uh, it's mostly overweight gentlemen, much like myself. I'm no Slim Jim. A lot
Okay.
of balding, overweight gentlemen in their
Let's
40s.
say like people who are like our age who are like calling back to a nostalgic time when that movie
Yeah,
came out
they're
first.
probably a little bit older than myself, just a little bit.
Because you said you're three. I mean, so in fairness to you, like I it sounds like because when I asked you the question about if you're the only person who had kids there, um, what I should tell everybody is that like I agree with what you did. And I also showed my kids RoboCop. I didn't go see it in the theater, but if it was playing in the theater, I probably would have. Um, and that I also grew up on that movie as well. I didn't get a chance to see it when I was three. The cut that I saw was like an ABC version, televised version. So for a long time, I didn't realize the movie was even rated R, uh, because there's fake commercials, and then when you play it against ABC, it has commercials. And this is back when like my mom recorded it on VHS from playing on ABC. So, um, and then as what happened last year was I bought a DVD, I bought a Blu-ray thinking that it had the PG-13 cut. I got my kids all psyched up to see it, and then when I found out that I apparently didn't have that version, I just played the movie because they were dying to see it. But we go through a lot of dialogue about, um, how they do certain special effects and how this works and where the animatronics are, and um, like we watched Terminator uh, 2 weeks ago. My daughter, who's in the third grade, a couple parts, she's like, oh, when she saw the Terminator, the exoskeleton like running at the end, she's like, ah, that's stop motion animation. And I go, well, if they can see that, and they know that, they know rear projection, then I took my kids to see Die Hard at the theater downtown where I'm at, and the night before they had played The Grinch, and when I walked in, the usher was like, "Hey," he's like, you're not for The Grinch, right? Like this is Die Hard," and I was like, "Oh yeah, Die Hard," and walked right in because I was the only one who had kids with me. So that all being said, I agree with what you did. Absolutely. Just so everybody's not confused, I'm not picking on you because I'm just jealous. Yeah, I'd have taken them. I'd have taken the
Oh,
kids.
by the way,
Yeah.
when I rolled into the theater, I bought my tickets online. So I rolled into the theater and I was like, all right, I bought my tickets online. Never been to this theater. He goes, okay, so you're here to see Twisters, right? And I went, no. And by the way, I'm wearing a no bullshit RoboCop t-shirt because that's the kind of grown ass adult I am. I wore my RoboCop T-shirt to see RoboCop in theaters. I was so excited, and I was like, "No, homie, I'm here to see this movie and this one right here." So, but no, but it's funny. Like, here's the thing: like, the '80s and '90s were a completely different time for a lot of reasons, but one of which, like, I've thought about this since having kids, is like you think about like the stuff they threw at us for like toys as kids. It's like
Hmm.
Terminator 2, RoboCop,
RoboCop's a
Demolition
set of
Man,
toys that I had.
uh,
Hmm.
Cliffhanger, just like on and on. Like all of these like super ultra violent movies had
Hmm.
toys that were geared towards us little angels.
Aliens.
Oh yeah,
Aliens had toys.
yeah. So you have these
Well,
ultra violent, ultra like in some cases, like man, the horror, like the violence in RoboCop is like ultra horror level. Like it's up there with like
hmm
Friday the 13th level horror, like some of the shit that they do in those movies.
hmm
But it's very much of that time too. Like the first movies don't do it, RoboCop and Terminator. But I've thought about this recently, especially. It's like, but Terminator 2 and RoboCop 2 like start introducing these elements of like kids that are in it.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's much more like John Connor and it's prevalent in Terminator 2, but you go back and watch RoboCop 2, which is a masterpiece in its own right, and that's a story for another day. Like it has that kid who's like the drug dealer who's also like he like
Mm.
starts becoming half sympathetic, and then by the time they get around to RoboCop 3, like for half the movie there's a kid in it, right? And it was just like that
Hmm.
it was just that time in the 90s where like you have these like very intriguing properties and you want to get as many eyeballs on them as you can. Predator's another one. Like there were Predator toys, but like remember of all the different like
Yeah.
Predators?
Hmm.
There's no way in shit any of us like God, Predator's like I think I'm 6. There's no way a 6-year-old
Yeah.
should be watching Predator 2. Like and again, like the first Predator, I've worn out the VHS tape on that, but like
That'd
both
be,
the
I mean,
top go
that'd
for
be
it.
like a Deadpool versus Wolverine like toy section right now. And it's
Uh,
like, but the movie is like clearly rated R, and it's being held as being like a movie that's like box office wise, like the highest grossing rated R movie. So I watched Terminator 2 last night, for the 100th time or whatever the fuck it was, what it was. But I did show it to my 4 daughters, and I mean, like, it's not that I'm not aware of the storyline, because obviously it's over 80, 80 to 100 viewings in, but it was the first time that I felt like it's interesting how the storyline is basically like of a kid who has like a pet robot in a way. Like he gets his own Terminator, and how that kind of juices in the story for the kids who are watching, and maybe why it had. I mean, aside from amazing special effects and everything that goes along with it, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful reasons to love that movie, but just how much there is this like young kid who's like he's like cool, my very own Terminator, and he can command it and tell it to do things and teach it morality and whatnot. Um, and yeah, it's like adding in kids to a movie where sometimes kids get added in and it sucks, and these other cases that they get added and it works. And then yet, if you're a young person who sees it, it's the same reason why you would have like the studios were like, oh, let's do Transformers, but you can't do Transformers unless you have a human element that the audience can follow.
yeah.
Or like if there's some type of alien invasion movie, like it has to be about the human element. This is a part of the invasion. Nowadays they like recently they haven't released yet. There's like just a Optimus Prime cartoon film has probably no humans in it, with Chris Hemsworth playing Optimus Prime, right? So they finally got to a point where it's like fuck the humans, we don't need them anymore. But in these rated R movies in the late '80s, early '90s, it was like, so where's the kids that are gonna help sell our toys for these R-rated blockbusters we have going on?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, when you go back to, 1987, '88, and it's like these ultra violent movies are like, yeah, well, we need to make more money and we need to get these kids in. Like, yeah, they're sitting there getting us ready with toys, and some of us like, hell, like, uh, not to rub it in on Ryan, but I saw all five Die Hard movies theatrically. That's just a just a unfortunate
He
fact of
means
life.
original theatrical release as well.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't see a
He's not
re-release
saying
of Die Hard.
re-release. He
I
means
saw it in
like,
the drive-in
yeah.
in a 19,
He means
1979 Ford
he
Bronco.
remembers waiting for Die Hard 2 to come out. Like,
But I mean, it's just funny to me that like you had all these franchises where super ultra violent, rated R, like not intended for kids and not whatsoever. Like I love RoboCop, and there are things about that movie like I think that are cool. I think there's so many things in that movie that are ahead of its time. Hell, we could talk about just that movie for whatever length of time and it'd be cool. But like just some of the things it was doing at a time that wasn't like everything in the 80s was super, like you got Rambo and Terminator and Conan. It's like very much testosterone driven, right? And then you've got this wiry guy who gets jammed inside of a robot, and then this ass kicking like Nancy Allen from Brian De Palma
mhm.
fame, right?
Yeah,
Who's normally like ditzy bimbo, like kind of half useless.
the way that
And
Brian
she's
De Palma saw his ex-wife. I'm not.
but like yeah, I mean I didn't cast her in those movies, but I sure did watch them. Um, but like she's just kicked so much ass in that movie. Like I mean she's
Mhm.
just as cool. And it's like it's for what that movie has. Like it is very positive to see and very interesting to see. And it's I don't know. There's aspects of it that were above my kid's head for will be above my kid's head for a while. In fact, like I said, I watched that movie as an adult and I started picking out things like seen that movie I don't know how many times, but the whole like there's a line of dialogue right after the Ed 209 goes awry, and Miguel Ferrero tells the old man in the company like we can go to prototype. We've already got cops that we're putting in different precincts to find the right candidate. And I didn't understand that when I was a kid. And then there's a line when Murphy's like, "Oh yeah, I came from a nice precinct to there, and they're transferring a lot of guys in." Well, yeah, like I didn't understand that they basically like profiled him out, and then like, oh,
Stuck him in a violent area.
yeah, they put him in there so that that would happen to him. And as an adult, I'm like, oh Jesus! And then now having being an adult and having a job in corporations and all that, it's also funny. It's like we privatized the police force, and by the way, when this motherfucker died, um, we put him back to work because we could do whatever. He signed the release,
Yeah,
and after that
he's
motherfucker
property
died,
now.
yeah, after that
He's not
motherfucker
supposed to
died,
have memories or
we put his
feelings.
ass back to cleaning up the streets of old Detroit. I, I, God, try to get a fucking day off for OCP, man. You know what's funny? Being in the Northwest too, like I think about some of these things. I'm like, God, if you were to remake that movie, because they have whatnot, there's all these crime areas. I'm like, Portland. You remake that movie and make it in Portland,
Hmm.
it'd be so believable. You'd be like, oh man, Portland's such a shithole. We need to tear half the city down. Everybody in America would watch that and be like, yeah, I believe it, including the people that probably live in Portland. Like it's the modern day Detroit. Detroit
Hmm.
people are like feel good about themselves compared to what's going on in Portland. Except for RoboCop would go into Portland and be like neutered like he is in RoboCop 2. It's like tell people not to smoke and get cats out of trees and whatnot. And be like, oh, oh. still worth rewatching though. And if you go on to Fandango.com, you can type in RoboCop and see when it's playing near you to get a notification. And I highly recommend
Oh,
you
dang.
personally do that. And all you dozens and handfuls of people at home, you should also go to Fandango and watch RoboCop on the big screen. You owe it to yourselves. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting cold.
Yeah, that's good. Um, well, we're about hitting the hour mark. Do we want
Yeah.
to call it or?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. Appreciate everybody who dialed in. We're gonna make this more of a thing. So uh, you know, like and subscribe at this button. And if that's not, it's the address to your mom's house, and both of us have been there too. So um, we won't tell you those stories on another day. And but thanks for chatting with me. Always a good time. And yeah, this is yeah.
No, yeah, it's good. No, yeah, we're gonna definitely make it a regular thing. I think what you're gonna get is probably an unfiltered commentary from Jason and I. Our kind of goal here is just be us, so and not kind of over edit anything. And I think that we kind of have a long history. Our joke with the fans, as we say, is we were on a production a long time ago. In fact, I was a part of another podcast that was similar to this, where it was the idea that like this fan base is as amassed as it was or whatever. Um, and so we kind of jokingly always make this assumption that nobody's listening. And so if you're one of the 12, we appreciate it. And we want you to know you're at the highest of our priorities because we're assuming that there's only 12, even if there's actually 15. So yeah.
Yeah, so Chet, tell me what you want to hear next month. And
Yeah.
that's what we're gonna give you, Chet.